What if I told you that um, the people who are the absolute fastest at solving problems are actually the most likely to fail in their careers?
I mean, it sounds completely backwards.
Right.
We live in a culture that practically worships efficiency. Like, we want the life hack, the quick fix, the actionable takeaway that solves the issue right this second.
We do. We really do.
Yeah.
And when we think about what it means to be, creative or innovative, we almost always frame it around fixing something that's broken.
Exactly. You picture a team of engineers locked in a room trying to patch a leaking spacecraft or something.
Yeah, or a marketing department trying to fix a slump in sales. Or even just you, right? Standing in your hallway trying to figure out how to organize a ridiculously cramped closet.
Right. It's like we treat creativity like a hammer and we just go looking for nails.
Yes. But today's deep dive is about to, well, completely upend that conventional wisdom. We're digging into a really fascinating piece from the MIT press reader.
Oh, this is a great one.
It was featured in Psychology Today by creativity researcher Keith Sawyer. And the core takeaway is honestly staggering.
It forces a total paradigm shift. Because when you look closely at the most compelling, truly innovative minds out there,
The ones who really change their fields.
right, the people who actually change things, they don't spend their energy looking for solutions. They actively reject the puzzle they were handed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they go searching for a completely different problem entirely.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because to really understand the mechanics of how this works, we have to use a sort of time machine, right?
We do.
We have to look at this watershed moment in behavioral psychology. It happened back in 1964 inside a studio at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago.
Right, the legendary psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi and his colleague Jacob Getzels.
Yes. They set up an experiment that was designed to observe the creative process in real time
And the environment they created was incredibly controlled. It had to be.
because of the variables.
Exactly. If you want to figure out how different human minds approach a blank canvas, you have to strip away all the external variables. So they brought in 31 advanced art students, one by one, into this very specific studio setting.
And every single student walked into the exact same parameters.
Not a single difference.
They were told they had exactly 1 hour on the clock. They were provided with a standard easel, some drawing paper, pencils, and charcoal.
Just the basics.
Right. And then there was the centerpiece. It was this table covered with a bizarre, highly curated assortment of 27 objects.
And we are talking about things like a bunch of grapes, a heavy steel gear shift from a machine.
A fragile antique book, I think?
Yes, and a glass prism.
I want to pause on those objects for a second because the selection wasn't random at all, right?
Not even a little bit. Think about the cognitive dissonance sitting on that table. You have organic, perishable shapes, like the grapes. You have cold, mechanical, industrial parts like the gear shift. You have historical artifacts, and you have objects that manipulate light, like the glass prism.
It is a deliberate cognitive collision.
Exactly.
It's honestly like walking into a kitchen and being handed gummy bears, a whole trout, and instant coffee.
That is a terrible meal.
Right. And someone just saying, make a cohesive meal. The researchers essentially told these students, look at this table, select any number of these objects,
Move them over to a second empty table.
arrange them however you want, and draw a still life. You have 1 hour. Go.
And because that prompt was identical for all 31 students, the researchers were able to isolate a massive divergence in human behavior.
Which is the crazy part.
Yeah, the students didn't just have slightly different artistic styles. They split into two fundamentally different psychological camps based on how they tackled the task.
Okay, so let's break down that first camp. We can call them the solvers.
Those solvers, right.
About half of the students walked into the studio and went straight into execution mode. They were highly efficient.
Very focused on the clock.
Right. They walked up to the table, made a quick decision. Maybe they grabbed, like, the antique book and the grapes, moved them over, set them down, and immediately went to the easel.
They started sketching a rough outline right away.
Yeah. They treated the prompt as a very clearly defined problem. Like, I have an hour. I need to produce a high-quality drawing of these objects. I need to maximize my drawing time to make it look good.
They optimized for execution. And mechanically, this is what our brains are hardwired to do in a professional or academic setting.
Because it feels good, right?
Exactly. When you check off a box, when you make a quick decision and start producing, your brain gives you a little hit of dopamine. You feel productive. You feel like you're doing the work.
But then you have the second camp. Let's call them the finders.
Ah, the finders.
This half of the students approached that room in a way that would make um, any modern project manager just pull their hair out.
Oh, absolutely.
They didn't just grab a few things and start drawing. They spent time, and I mean a lot of time, up to 50 minutes of their 60-minute hour doing absolutely nothing that looked like drawing.
They were just exploring.
Yeah. They were picking the objects up. They were physically turning the steel gear shift over in their hands, feeling its weight.
They were looking at the antique book through the glass prism to see how the light distorted the text.
It's almost like they were playing.
That's exactly what it was. They would build an arrangement, stare at it, take it completely apart, and build a new one. They were erasing whatever tiny preliminary marks they had made on the paper.
They completely refused to solve the visual problem right away.
Instead, they used the time to find and formulate a completely new visual problem.
Okay, I have to challenge the logic here, though.
Go for it.
Let's look at the actual math of that hour.
Yeah.
If a student spends 50 minutes just, playing with a gear shift and a glass prism, they only have 10 minutes left to actually draw.
Right. It sounds like terrible time management.
It does. They have to absolutely scramble, panicked, in a last-minute sprint just to put charcoal on paper before the buzzer sounds.
Yeah.
Contrast that with a solver who spent 55 minutes carefully shading and refining their art. How is it physically or cognitively possible that a rushed 10-minute sketch yields a better result than a carefully crafted 55-minute drawing?
It seems impossible if you equate time spent executing with the quality of the idea.
Right, which we usually do.
We do. But execution without formulation just results in a beautifully rendered cliche.
Sure.
To judge the results, the researchers brought in a board of highly respected, independent art critics.
And these critics didn't know anything about the process, right?
What's fascinating here is that the critics had no idea who drew what or how much time was spent on the drawing versus the arranging. They evaluated all 31 final sketches purely on their artistic merit.
And the critics overwhelmingly chose the work of the finders.
Overwhelmingly. They determined that the rushed, frantic work of the students who spent all their time exploring produced significantly more original, aesthetically compelling, and dynamic sketches.
That is just wild. So mechanically, what is actually happening there?
Yeah.
Why is the 10-minute sprint win?
Because of what was happening during those 50 minutes of exploration, the finders weren't procrastinating, they were calibrating.
Calibrating, I like that.
When you combine a gear shift and a bunch of grapes right away, you were just drawing two objects next to each other. It's a boring question to answer.
Right.
But when you spend 50 minutes turning them over, shining light through the prism onto the steel, you are forcing your brain's semantic networks to find a new relationship between the organic and the mechanical.
You are creating a much more complex, fascinating problem.
Yes. And once you find that brilliant problem, the actual execution, the drawing part, is just the mechanical output of a great idea.
It literally makes me think of someone trying to drive to a specific, hard-to-find destination.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like the solver mindset is the person who jumps in the car, slams on the gas, and drives 100 miles an hour immediately.
Right. They feel really productive because they are going fast.
Exactly, but they're driving in the completely wrong direction.
Exactly.
Meanwhile, the finder is the person sitting in the driveway for 50 minutes, painstakingly calibrating their GPS, checking the traffic routes, and analyzing the map.
It looks like they are doing nothing.
Right. But when they finally put the car in drive for those last 10 minutes, they go straight to the destination.
That is the perfect way to look at it. The problem with driving 100 miles an hour in the wrong direction is that you get really good at arriving at the wrong place.
Ow! Yeah.
And the critics could see that on the canvas. The solvers drew very technically proficient, incredibly boring pictures.
This is a massive shift in how we think about productivity. But I do want to push on the reality of this.
Sure.
Art school in the 1960s is a very specific, protected bubble.
It is.
It is great that a panel of ivory tower critics loved a highly conceptual 10-minute charcoal sketch of a prism. That gets you an A in class.
Right.
But when you graduate, you have rent. You have clients who want deliverables. You have galleries that demand inventory. Does this messy 50-minute problem-finding mindset actually translate to paying the bills and surviving in the real world?
It's the essential question.
Yeah.
And it's the exact question the researchers themselves had. Producing a cool sketch in a lab doesn't mean you can sustain a creative career.
Right. The real world is a different beast.
So Csikszentmihalyi and Getzels didn't just publish the lab results and move on. 5 years after the students graduated, they conducted a rigorous follow-up study.
Wait, they tracked them down.
They managed to track down 27 of the original participants to see what reality had actually dealt them.
How do you even measure that objectively? Like, you can't just ask an artist, hey, do you feel successful?
Yeah.
Because that's entirely subjective.
Exactly. They needed hard, quantitative metrics. They looked for concrete evidence of creative survival.
Like, they tracked down data on things like, did these former students have solo gallery shows? Did they secure professional dealer representation? Had they actually sold any of their work to collectors?
Okay, those are very real metrics.
Were their pieces featured in any legitimate museum exhibitions? And even if they weren't working strictly as studio artists, had they managed to stay in the ecosystem in art-adjacent careers, like teaching at a high level or curating?
And the results from this 5-year reality check are so definitive, it almost sounds made up.
It really does.
The students who utilized that problem-finding style back in the studio, the ones who spent their time calibrating the GPS in the driveway, were vastly more successful across every single one of those real-world metrics.
They were the ones getting the gallery shows, getting the representation, and actually making a living off their creativity.
But the data on the other side of that coin is what we really need to pay attention to.
Yeah, let's look at the ultimate fate of the solvers.
The highly efficient students who locked in early and just executed.
The researchers looked at the 11 students who were the absolute least problem-finding in their approach back in the 1964 studio. 5 years later, 8 of those 11 had dropped out of the art world entirely.
8 out of 11. That is staggering.
It is.
They didn't just transition into being curators or graphic designers. They left the profession completely. The very people who were the most efficient at executing the assignment were the least equipped to survive in a creative career.
Right.
Why does that happen?
Because the real world doesn't hand out syllabuses.
Oof, true.
When you are a solver, your entire methodology relies on someone else handing you a neatly packaged problem. In school, the teacher says, draw this.
Right. Or in an entry-level job, the manager says, fill out this spreadsheet.
Exactly. The solver thrives there. But as you progress in your career, or in life generally, the neatly packaged assignments disappear. No one tells you what to draw anymore.
And so what happens?
If your only skill is execution and you are suddenly faced with an empty room and no instructions, you freeze. You drop out.
You literally don't know how to figure out what to do next.
Right.
Which brings this entire conversation out of the 1960s art scene and right into the lap of everyone listening to this right now.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this dynamic isn't about charcoal and easels at all.
No, it's about how we navigate modern life. The legacy of this experiment was formalized in a 1976 book by Csikszentmihalyi called The Creative Vision.
A classic.
And Keith Sawyer notes that even though the book is long out of print, it is considered a foundational text in understanding how to navigate what psychologists and sociologists call wicked problems.
Wicked problems is a term everyone should know because it is what you spend 90% of your adult life dealing with.
Yeah, explain the difference here.
Well, a defined problem is like a math equation. There's a clear right answer, and you just have to do the work to get there.
Right.
A wicked problem is entirely different. It is complex. It is ill-defined. The rules of the game literally shift while you're trying to play it.
Sounds like most jobs, honestly.
Exactly. The stakeholders all have different competing needs, and there is absolutely no answer key at the back of the book.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's break this down with a real-world example because this is where the theory hits the pavement for you, the listener.
Yeah, let's make it practical.
Think about your day-to-day life. If your boss hands you a massive data set and says, format these columns, find the quarterly totals, and put it in a bar graph, that is a defined problem.
You know exactly what success looks like.
Right. You just need to be a solver. You sit down, you execute, you get it done.
Right. Efficiency is perfectly fine for defined tasks.
But what happens when that same boss walks into your office, shuts the door, and says, our team's morale has completely tanked over the last 6 months, and our best people are quitting. Figure out how to fix it.
Oh, man. That is a wicked problem.
Exactly.
And this is where we see the exact same 1964 art studio dynamic play out in the modern office. If you attack that morale issue with a solver mindset, what do? You
just jump right in.
You grab the first 2 objects on the table, you immediately send out a generic employee feedback survey, and you schedule a mandatory pizza party for Friday afternoon.
The dreaded pizza party.
Right. You check the boxes, you executed a solution.
And it completely fails. The employees resent the pizza party because it feels patronizing, and the survey questions don't address the actual root cause of their burnout.
You drove 100 miles an hour in the wrong direction.
Yes, you solved the most obvious problem. People want free food instead of solving the right problem.
To actually fix team morale, you have to become a finder. You have to resist the urge to immediately do something that looks like progress.
They have to sit in the driveway.
You have to spend your proverbial 50 minutes turning the gears over in your hands. A finder would spend weeks just observing the team.
Right.
They would look at the communication channels. They would notice that emails are being sent at midnight. They would look at how the software tools are causing friction.
They would talk to people off the record.
Exactly.
Right.
They would tolerate the discomfort of not having an answer yet, just so they can formulate the correct question.
And that formulation phase is exactly what Csikszentmihalyi argued is the true heart of creativity.
It really is.
In The Creative Vision, he wrote that this ability to formulate problems is a faculty of a different order. It isn't just basic logic or deductive reasoning.
It's much deeper than that. He argued that problem finding is holistic. It requires engaging a person's total experiential state.
What does that mean in practice, though?
It means when you are trying to understand why a team is burning out, or why a marketing campaign feels flat, or how to arrange a gear shift in a glass prism, you aren't just doing math. You are pulling from your intuition.
Right.
You are pulling from past experiences of when you felt burned out. You are relying on your empathy, your sensory observations, and crucially, your tolerance for ambiguity.
That tolerance for ambiguity is the hardest part. It feels terrible to sit in the unknown.
It's so uncomfortable.
When you are just sitting there, analyzing the light through the prism, or just listening to employee complaints without offering a fix, the clock is ticking down.
Always.
Your brain, your boss, your culture is screaming at you to just pick up the charcoal and produce a deliverable. We exist in an ecosystem that constantly demands metrics, output, and immediate ROI.
Which is why true creativity is actually an act of resistance.
Oh, I love that. An act of resistance.
It is the refusal to jump at the first obvious answer. Csikszentmihalyi concluded that problem finding is the true origin of the creative process. It never begins with the solution.
Wow.
The spark of innovation only happens in that uncertain, searching, somewhat uncomfortable state of mind where you are still trying to figure out what the question even is.
So the ultimate takeaway here is a mandate to slow down.
Absolutely.
In a world that is practically begging you to be a quick-draw artist, the most valuable, enduring thing you can do is pause. You have to be willing to look inefficient for a while.
Yep.
Delay the execution just long enough to make absolutely certain that the mountain you are about to sprint up is actually the right mountain.
And that leaves us with a really provocative question to consider regarding the systems we all live and work in today.
Let's hear it.
Keith Sawyer noted in his research that the absolute best professors and mentors are the ones who teach students how to create in this problem-finding style.
The ones who teach them how to carve their own paths rather than just follow instructions.
Exactly. But those mentors are rare.
Very rare.
Because think about the structures we operate in. From standardized testing in elementary school to KPI-driven performance reviews in the corporate world, our institutions primarily reward us for quickly and quietly solving clearly defined tasks.
They reward the solvers.
They do. But if we know that the most successful, compelling, and resilient minds are the ones who spend their time searching for the problem, are we systematically training the creativity out of ourselves?
Oh, wow.
Are we building entire organizations of people who will freeze the second the rules change?
It is a terrifying thought. We might be manufacturing our own obsolescence by rewarding the exact mindset that causes people to drop out of their fields.
Exactly. So the real challenge for you, listening right now, isn't about changing the whole system overnight. It is much more personal.
Right.
How can you, this week, carve out your own 50 minutes of exploration time? When you are handed your next wicked problem, how can you protect that space to just turn the gear shift over in your hands before you rush to the easel?
That is the perfect thought to leave on. Stop trying to solve everything the second it hits your desk. Be the explorer who takes the time to figure out what the picture should even look like.
Well said.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Take that challenge with you today. Keep questioning the puzzles you're handed, and above all else, keep exploring. We'll catch you next time.